All right, welcome back to the Firefighter Craftsmanship Podcast, where we guide you through the psychology of high performance, expand your mindset, and strengthen your resilience. And today we have an honorable guest with us. Very excited to talk to the author of Breathe How You Want to Feel, Matteo Pistono. How's it going this morning?
Yeah, good morning, Kev. Nice to meet you, and nice to be on the pod.
Yeah, and just right on the intro on here, we kind of have a small circle of connection here with you growing up initially in Wyoming and me being right here in northern Colorado. So it's always kind of fun to see. The world is definitely not a massive place, even though you've traveled to far, far away lands in your journey.
For sure.
So kind of tell us just a quick little bit about yourself and what was really the inspiration to write this amazing reference guide, Breathe How You Want to Feel.
Yeah. Kev, I've been teaching meditation for a long time. Like as you said, I grew up in Wyoming, but then after I went to University of Wyoming, I ended up going abroad and I ended up living in Asia for a decade or so, and then in Europe for about 5 years. And I was studying Eastern philosophy. I was studying Buddhism and yoga. And then I started teaching. I was writing books, but I started teaching a lot of meditation. And about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I just noticed that when I was teaching meditation, either to individuals or groups, that people were coming with such an elevated nervous system. The idea of sitting down and saying, hey, just place your mind on your breath or think about these things in a little bit different way. Their system was so overwhelmed that it was next to impossible to do that. So I was using the breath as a way to prepare the body and the mind for meditation. I was teaching various techniques to use the breath to down regulate the nervous system so that they could concentrate, so they could focus, so they could have their mind be more malleable and do what they want with it. And so I was teaching, essentially teaching all of these various breathing techniques, these conscious breathing techniques. And now it's a bit fashionable to talk about breath work. That's what is a bit of the rage. I mean, this has been going on for 2,500 years or 3,000 years in India, known as pranayama. So I've been studying these things for 30 years. I brought it together, and I brought it together in this book, Breathe How You Want to Feel, where I talk a bit about background, but it's really about using the breath that we all have. It's all available to us. It's cost free. And all we got to have to do is learn how to partner with our breath to regulate our nervous system.
Yeah, and there it is. That's the reason why I wanted you on the podcast for
Mhm.
sure. With a community of like-minded people who are trying to push the edge of human performance, but most of the listeners are involved in emergency services somehow: fire, police, warfighting, EMS, and we talk a lot about on the Firefighter Craftsmanship Podcast parasympathetic activation, right? Which is chill out, man, calm down,
Right.
And as we all know, if you've ever been in a relationship and you tell your partner, hey, just calm down, like that is not,
Not
that's
very
not,
skillful. No.
yeah, not an advisable technique. Unfortunately, I learned that lesson a lot. And so we all need, in emergency services specifically, we're dealing with things like hypervigilance and our window of tolerance, the the space between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system is getting smaller the more years that you have on the job because of the demands of the job, the organizational challenges that a lot of us have to go through, sleep deprivation, getting older, possibly poor nutrition, on and on and on. And then you also have things outside of the career, family issues, finances, moving, whatever, that also impact that just like everybody else does. But so the window of tolerance in emergency services is getting smaller and smaller by the year for sure. We can see the stress and you see it over
Mm.
social media. And then
Yeah.
it could turn into hypervigilance and all of these other things. And so we talk a lot about, hey, get tougher by chilling out, get tougher by creating more parasympathetic space so you're more resistant to stress before you need it.
Yeah.
And so to hear you talk right away of like, hey, I was a meditation teacher and people were coming to me and I couldn't even really start what I initially wanted to, like that is spot on. And I think all of us I know for sure me, that's the coolest part about hosting a podcast is I can just learn so much stuff.
Yeah.
That is something that I continually need is how do I down regulate faster, be able to process more information in varying types of situations. And typically, to be honest, it's not on the job. It's dealing with the kid with homework or
Yeah.
why didn't you clean your room? Even though I asked you 37 times or whatever,
Yeah. That aspect of when we have an elevated system, an elevated nervous system, and we're using that language, and that's the language that I use in the book because I talk about right at the beginning of the book, I talk about how there's various ways for us to talk about these things, and I talk about that as a map of understanding. So I could use a map of understanding, like I could use all of the Buddhist language, which is a Buddhist map of understanding, or I could use the yogic language, which is the yoga map of understanding. But here we're using this, the map of understanding is human physiology as we understand the autonomic nervous system. As you just mentioned, that we have this sort of sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's the way that I navigate the book with the breath. And what we find is that if we try to use the mind to overcome the mind. So say if I'm like if I step on a Lego, right? And I'm immediately angry because for whatever, because my kid did that or for whatever, or just pick your stressor. It could be a Lego, it could be something on the news you see, it could be something horrific that you saw on a call. Whatever the stressor is, it elevates our system. And if we say to ourselves, hey, I just need to, chill out. I need to get it together. If we're using the mind to overcome the mind, while it's possible, it's a heavy, heavy lift. And so what I choose to do, what I have chosen to do with the book is immediately affect the nervous system with the breath. You don't have to convince yourself. There's no belief involved. There's no sort of there's nothing that we have to do with the intellect to convince ourselves of it. And it's literally can be within the next half breath on the next exhale, you can down regulate. You can turn down the volume in your system. And that's in the acute situation. But if we do that regularly, then we can have more parasympathetic tone with our entire system. And that makes us a better decision maker, whether we're on the job or with our partner, or doing whatever we're doing in life.
That's amazing, right? Using the mind to try to overcome the mind is
Yeah, it's
at times it's a failed strategy.
for sure, absolutely. And this is taught a lot in Buddhism. We use the contemplative tradition, and I've been doing that for over 30 years, and I see the benefit of doing that when my nervous system is regulated. But if I'm totally out of whack, then I can't concentrate, I can't focus. The slightest stimulation, like the person moving next to me in the meditation hall, can make me super irritable, right? That's on me, but of course, because I'm in this elevated state, I shift the focus and I blame the thing that's external to me and not recognize that it's my reaction that I'm disliking. I'm disliking the feeling of it within my body, that reaction. And so we externalize the blame, right? And so here and the way that the paradigm that I use is I use the acronym AIR, right? Awareness, intervention, regulation, right? And so being aware of what is actually happening within my body at any particular time. And let me just say this. I know that I'm talking on an emergency with you as a firefighter and with emergency services, and like I want to say super thanks, like big time appreciation for everybody who's listening to this who are involved with that. And so, and I haven't been on a call. Like I don't know exactly what you guys are going through when you come up on a site, right? I can't. I can only imagine that. And so, with respect, I'm offering this. I offer the book and whatnot, but I just want to say that I recognize that I don't exactly know what it's like to come on, when there's burn victims or when there's like what all of the different things that can happen with that. So, but let me just say this, that there's this AIR, right? There's this acronym of AIR, awareness of how I'm feeling and how I'm responding in a particular situation to the stimulus around me, whether that be external situation or the thoughts and emotions rising within. So we have this awareness of what's happening. And then if I want to change that, the quickest way to do that is vis-a-vis the breath. It's not to sort of say, hey, Matteo, just chill out right now. That's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to have a breathing intervention in your sort of toolkit, in your pocket. And it's not complicated. It can be extending the exhale. It can be a slight hold on the exhale. It can be doing various things that I talk about in the book. And then that intervention regulates the nervous system. And there's a feedback loop, that regulation, then you're aware of that. And so I use this air awareness, intervention, regulation as a sort of as a format for us to talk about using the breath.
Yeah, you're spot on. You're spot on. And you don't need to be on a 911 call to understand that. And I think, we've had past guests on here. We talked off camera a little bit about, Chief Dina Ali and the work that she's doing where she's
Super
talking.
respect to her. Wow.
Really great stuff, and it's not just the calls that's getting us as well. So you're a human and we're humans as well. So you understand the human experience and you understand that, yes, there's stress with your occupation, but there's a lot of stress when you're not at work also, and so that human element applies. And sometimes in emergency services, we go to things that humans aren't really built to see and process. And we have to figure out how to solve those things. And that's a trained response, right? So that part of like fight or flight is when we intentionally say, hey, that house is on fire. I know what to do. I've been trained on how to do that. Most of the time, firefighters are excited to go do their job. That's what they want to go do. And then they go do that, but it doesn't eliminate the stress that's still there just from a very, very primal sense, which is things like elevated respiration rate, elevated heart
rate,
right? Your cognitive decline just based on heart rate variability and heart rate and all of those things, all of that's happening. And you can hear it in the radio voice when people are talking on the radio and they're amped, even though afterwards you might say, hey, why were you so stressed out? And you're like, oh, I wasn't, I was super stoked. It's like, well, but you missed a lot of inputs because your body is in a stress response. And so that's that correlation to why breath is so important for humans, but especially for emergency responders, because you are intentionally going into those environments and you want to succeed when you go into those environments to the best of your possible ability, regardless of where you work or what branch of service you work in.
Right. Kev, can I tell you one story that I didn't include in the book? It was a nurse in the ER in Denver at Denver Health. And she came to me, she was just asking for advice. And so I ended up like sort of working with her for a few months. And she had a very difficult time in her home life because of the stress that she was bringing from work. And we were able to identify that one of the reasons that she was she was a ER nurse, as I said, was there was some sort of alarm, sort of a alarm bell or sort of a buzzer that would go off when it was sort of like a critical situation, and it was sort of all hands on deck. And it would go off often. And when it would go off, we identified that what she would do is she would seize for a moment, she would brace. She would, like, as though she was going to get punched in the gut, she would brace, and she would stop. She would have an unconscious breath hold. She would be holding her breath because she was just tense from the stress. And then she would move in, she would do her job, but she was carrying this with her. And then when she would go home, when there would be the slightest of irritations, she would do the same thing. She would brace as though she was going to get punched. And she developed this habit such that she couldn't take a deep breath. She could not expand her rib cage to breathe because she trained herself to be in this. It was this habitual response. So what we did was, using this awareness, intervention, regulation, we worked through sort of just on calls, not like when she was in the hospital, thinking about what is it like when you hear this. I would have her visualize and hear in her mind's ear, in her mind's eye, that sound, and she would feel it. So what we worked on was that sound would come about, and she would just place her hand on her just above her belly button. And then she wouldn't think about what's happening, but she would just try to feel the movement of her belly moving outward against her hand when she breathed in. And then she would slightly press in on the exhale. So that was going to be the intervention. And then that leads to the self-regulating. It took some months. But what ended up happening was after about 2 months, when she would go into the ER, that would go, if she had the wherewithal to just, even if she was moving into her station, she would put her hand on her belly and do that one breath intervention, right? Breathe out, feel the belly go out, breathe in, push in. And what happened was the stressor, that ringing alarm, that was what she had in her mind and in her body as the reason that she was getting so stressed out. It became the reminder to breathe, to take just a slightly larger breath and a slightly longer exhalation. So it was like the spur for her to relax in a stressful situation. And so we can learn to do these things. They're just habitual actions. And, like I said, I don't know what it's like to be on a call as a firefighter. And I don't know, but you still have to breathe. You still have to drive. And if you can, for example, place your tongue on the roof of the mouth, keep your lips closed and breathe through your nose, that will stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system to some degree. And there's a whole host of other things that they're not complicated, they're cost-free, and you can do them. We're taking 20,000, 25,000 breaths a day anyway. So why not use some of them to increase our resilience?
What a great story, and really, really applicable, because for most of us in our systems, there's some sort of tone that indicates that, hey, you're up, you're going on this call.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of really interesting cardiac research around tones, especially at night. And so, some of the newer systems have ramp up tones. So if you're asleep, your radio is on what we would call night mode at our department. So you're not hearing every single call for every engine across the entire city. It's only goes off when it's yours, but then lights come on. And now we have ramp up tones in some of our stations, maybe all of our stations at this point, but it's in an effort for cardiac health to not just boom, jolt you awake.
Yeah.
And so that's a very interesting correlation, because in the ER, especially a system like Denver Health, that's a legitimate hospital, right? And so they are very, very busy. And so boom, hey, full trauma's coming in, or whatever that thing indicates. All right, man, it's a Super Bowl. It's time to go to work. Just even thinking about that, I have a stress response here of thinking like, boom, structure fire, and for us, it would be listing off the units that are going, structure fire, and then all the units that are en route. And so that's a totally different stress response, even after 20 years of it, for me, than if it's, hey, engine 2, and you're going to a lift assist. That's a totally right. There's still a stress response there because the tones are there. But it's the awareness of saying, now I'm hauling butt to get to the rig and get all my gear on and all that stuff. And now I'm amped because I'm trying to beat everybody else. And now I got to get in there and figure out where we're going, and boom, 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 amped. And my first and my second and my third, all of those different things. And now if you have dispatch come on and say, hey, we have multiple callers. Okay. So it's a working fire and we have people trapped, right? Boom. There's a whole nother level of stress that you have to at least be aware of it. You can't change the fact that this building is on fire yet, right? That's why we're going to change that. But we can't also change that there's multiple reports of people being trapped. I have to be aware that now, hey, there's extra stress in my life, and I got to figure out where is my optimal performance zone, right? Using like Yerkes Dodson psychology stuff to down regulate. More than likely, like most of the time, we don't have to try to get up and get going on calls like that. We have to bring ourselves, woo, baby, I'm panting already, and I'm just sitting in the rig. I'm not even driving. I'm just riding to the call, And so the correlation there is exactly the same.
Yeah. I've talked to nurses at Denver Health, other nurses that use this one thing. I just encourage them, as they're moving about their day, is to keep their tongue on the roof of their mouth. And they're like, what? I said, keep your tongue on the roof of your mouth with your lips closed and breathe through your nose. And they're like, well, what does that do? And we have this the principal nerve for the parasympathetic nervous system is the vagus nerve. It's in the back of the sort of at the base of the skull, and it comes over the reason they call it the vagus nerve is it's the same root of the word vagabond. I mean, so there's this wandering nerve. So it goes from the base of our skull over the roof of our mouth, down our neck, all the way down below the stomach. And it's the main feedback loop from our body that is telling our brain what the situation is. So the communication goes about 80% to the brain. So if we can stimulate the vagus nerve, then we can tell our body, okay, we got this. It's all good. I'm going to make, I'm going to be in the decision making. I'm not going to be sort of forced right now. I'm going to make the decisions. And the way that we can do that, I mean, there's many ways, but one of them is to stimulate the vagus nerve by placing the tongue on the roof of the mouth, just lightly on the roof of the mouth, behind the front teeth, not touching. And if you can suction it, some people can do that where the whole tongue is on the roof of the mouth. But even if you just have the tip of the tongue behind the front teeth, you have it there. That also opens up the airways optimally in the back of the throat. And you don't have this constriction that's around the throat that sometimes we don't even recognize that happens when the mouth is open and the tongue sags to the back of the throat. And we have this sensation of strangulation, but we might not be aware of it. So we're sort of panting, this type of thing. So we just have the tongue on the roof of the mouth, lips closed, and we're breathing through the nose. And as you've covered on the podcast here, there's so many benefits physiologically and emotionally to be breathing through the nose rather than mouth breathing. So this is the main thing I tell people again and again and again is keep your mouth closed, tongue on the roof of the mouth, breathe through your nose. And it helps to elevate that parasympathetic tone. So I just envision this, and I'm told that I haven't ever talked to any firefighters before, but I've envisioned it before I got on this, talking to you, like, you see firefighters going to a call, and I'm just wondering, are they doing anything right beforehand? Because of course, as you just mentioned, there's all of these different stressors that are coming at them, and they're just ramping. And if they can do one thing and just habitually have their tongue on the roof of the mouth and be breathing through the nose, it seems as though it would bring benefit to them for better decision making and better respiration.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get into why better respiration is really important here in a second for the fire service specifically. But you bring up some good points. And I think, we say over and over and over on the Firefighter Craftsmanship Podcast is awareness is foundational. And
Mm,
so how are you breathing? Okay. And so we're in political season. Hooray. I can't wait for the
yeah.
ads to stop, right? But so just notice like there's an ad that pops on the tape on the TV or whatever during the football game, or even the football game itself might be a stressor for you.
Yeah.
Try to notice in those moments of stress where you haven't controlled the input, how are you breathing? Is your mouth
Yeah.
open? Is your mouth closed? Just that simple. Just start there.
Exactly. I love
Or
this
are you holding
awareness
your
of
breath, right?
foundation. Yeah,
Yeah.
awareness of foundation. I didn't know that you have that, like that. I haven't heard that on this. Yeah, but it's like that's completely in line with the way that I present breathing. And the type of awareness that we're talking about is often when we use the word awareness, we think awareness of something external to us, awareness of the cup, awareness of the screen, awareness out here. But we're talking about interoceptive awareness here. And that is this, it's how am I feeling in my body right now? And some of us, um, we don't pay attention so much. We just do things that we think or that we're told to do because we think it's going to make us feel good. But we have to check in. And so it's a bit of a skill to be able to just it's where the awareness and we just check in. So as you just said, that whatever the political ad comes on, we see the face, the face of the candidate or the color or whatever it is of the hat or of the sign or whatever the case may be. We see that. And oftentimes our system will elevate, right? We see something political and our heart rate will go up. Maybe we'll pant a little bit. We might even feel uncomfortable. And oftentimes what we do is we say, that's wrong, the thing out there. But what we're actually reacting to is the feeling in our body, right? And we don't have control. We don't have control of the color of the hat that the political opponent wears, or whatever they're saying. We don't have any control of that at all, but we do have control of our response. And that is our superpower. Our superpower is our ability to respond appropriately rather than react habitually. Right? Because we react habitually and it just it doesn't serve us so well oftentimes.
Absolutely. And the reason that we went down this alley is because it's an easy example to show that if you're not aware of what's happening daily in your daily life with the daily stressors, then you won't just figure it out on the 911 call when you're going to CPR in progress of a certain aged individual.
So correct.
Right. And so if you're breathing really crappy at rest and you're hanging out and your mouth is open and, and you don't have a cold, and so you're breathing and you're creating stress within your body just by breathing through your mouth. If you're doing that all the time, well, now when there's an actual stressor that you have to deal with, whether it's on the job or off the job, you already are less resilient and you don't just figure it out. That's not how your body works. Your body is built for survival. And so if you can train yourself to be more resilient before you need it, that's the best, right? And so like when we teach a recruit academy, we always incorporate tactical fitness, and we have, a fitness component of that, and we run physical training and we do it with them. And it's not like a crazy hard workout by any means. And we build in different mindset training within that workout. But we just start with a simple warm up, right? Like, hey, let's start swinging our arms. And I always stop and I watch as the coach. I watch, how are they breathing? And pretty much every single time, 100% of the participants, when they just start doing arm swings, so anything related to physical fitness, boom, mouth is open, and they're in and out through the mouth. And then there's a good coaching thing there of like, hey, you're creating unnecessary stress because I haven't told you what the workout is. All I've told you is to start swinging your arms. So you're like, oh, I'm kind of nervous, right? And so there's another opportunity. So just in your day-to-day life, when that phone call rings and that's that one phone call, let's say you're waiting on a job, very stressful, right? How are you breathing? What do you feel like? Like all of us can kind of feel now what that feels like when you're waiting for that job offer potentially. Did I get it? Did I not get it? You're nervous. And if you can tap in really quick, how am I breathing? Just like the nurse example. So the cue was, hey, siren, buzzer, alarm, whatever. I hold my breath, and we see that very, very common in the classes that we teach as well as under stress, especially when they're on air in SCBA. A lot of people hold their breath, which makes your brain way worse. It doesn't make you tougher by holding your breath, right?
Right. It's so important that this notion of practicing the skill before you need it. Because when we're under and we can practice these interventions, the eye of the air, right? And when we're talking about those interventions, again, they're not super complicated. It might just be being able to turn the attention towards the breath, notice what it's doing, and then extending your exhale for 2 count more than your inhale. Something like that. So you just find your breath, and then you just count how much you inhale, and then you count an extra 2 counts on the exhale. When we exhale longer than we inhale, we flip the switch on the parasympathetic nervous system. We can incorporate conscious breath holding, like a hold at the end of the exhale, or box breathing, something like this. So, but we need to practice these beforehand because there is some subtlety to it. It's just another skill. And it's a skill for us to increase our mental fitness. Like our mental, you talk about resiliency. Part of that resilience overall is this mental fitness. And And so then where do we do that? I mean, it can be when you step on the Lego, but I like to, where I personally incorporate it is when I'm exercising. I sort of, I'm doing my HIIT workout, or if I ride my bike a lot, or right before I surf, right before whether it's preparation beforehand or in the midst of, for example, if you have a HIIT session and it's like something super short, in between sets, when you get done with one set and your heart rate is jacked and you're breathing hard and you want to be panting, that is an amazing time to apply these tools. So what do? You close once you get a hold of your breath, and it may be that there has to be some, it's a range, right? And so you apply those at the time. And I think that you even mentioned on one of your podcasts, I incorporate different things by controlling the breath, but also incorporate visualization and sort of recitations of words that help us grab a hold of the breath and do what we want with it.
Yeah, and there's a correlation between the breath and then that choosing your mindset. Are you talking to yourself or are you listening to yourself? And
Oh,
there's a
so
lot of
important.
value, right? A lot of value there. Absolutely.
Yeah, tell me, like, explain what you mean by that. I haven't. That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a quote, and I apologize, I can't think what his name was, but he was a marathoner who I think he had like a disabled son, and or he was a triathlete, Ironman, and he would push his child who was a grown adult, but he would like tow him in a boat when he was swimming and push him on the run and tow him when he was riding the bike. And that was him, Dr. Giles, maybe was his last name. And that was a quote of, I've learned to talk to myself versus listen to myself. So every time that I hear myself saying, oh, you can't go any further, you got to quit, I change the narrative to, well, I'm actually in control of this, and this is what we're going to do. And I think that there's that correlation, like with the breath thing, because if you're a firefighter recruit and you're stressed out and you're holding your breath or you're panting and you're maybe kind of in a compromised situation, like in an SCBA confidence maze or something like that. And we see you panting, and that's creating a stress response, which sometimes is not great, right? And so I can say, hey, Matteo, slow your breathing down. And without changing any of your other circumstances, 100% of the time, if you hear me, you will slow your respiration rate down to a noticeable level. And then we can have a conversation, or I could say, hey, Matteo, do you really need to be breathing that fast? Right? We're just doing arm swings. Do you really need to be breathing that hard? And you're like, oh, I never really thought about it. And so
Yeah.
there is just that conscious input into an unconscious thing because of the habits and the systems that you've built over years and years and years that now we kind of have to deal with. But the correlation to us being able to perform in high stress environments, on the job, off the job, is undeniable. And there's tons and tons of research around that.
Yeah, it's really interesting to talk to you about this, Kev, because not everybody not all of the sort of demographics who I speak to about this are really focused mostly on the parasympathetic, right? I mean, in modern culture, there's some aspect of that. Everybody wants to relax and sort of deal with their stress or anxiety, um, but there's also, because there's a spectrum, and we can have access if we want to turn up our system. And I work with a lot of people who actually need to turn up their system. They actually need to increase the sympathetic nervous system because they're lethargic, because they have no focus, because they have no concentration. And of course, you're talking about where the firefighters, you guys get that sympathetic gets turned way up, and you need to turn that down as you increase your parasympathetic tone. So there's this spectrum that we can work, and I talk about in Breathe How You Want to Feel how we can do this. For example, yesterday morning when I went surfing, it was early in the morning, and I went out. I just got up and I went out, and I needed to wake up before I went in the ocean, right? And so I actually consciously stressed my body out, right? I just did like 10 rounds or 10 breaths, only 10 breaths of hyperventilating. Just inhale through the nose, out of the mouth. and and it was that, like, my heart rate increased. I felt blood moving to my extremities. I held my breath at the top for just a little bit. I could focus more, and I just felt ready to go take on a challenge, which was paddling out in the ocean, where there's going to be a lot of other sort of stimulations, right? And let me just say here, I don't recommend doing any breath work when you're in water, any of this sort of conscious breathing when you're in the water. So I just want to note that. But it's just as a way that in there's this whole spectrum, and we can use that to our advantage. Like, we have that available to us. And what we're tapping into is our evolutionary response to stressors, right? So, cortisol and adrenaline, they're not necessarily all bad, but elevated levels of it all the time. When I talked to my brother, who worked on a helicopter he worked on air life for a decade, and he's been in the ER for about, I think, 20, 25 years in Denver. And he talked to me about being on the helicopter, where when he was there, even when they weren't on call, his system was always, it was almost like there was like an IV drip of cortisol and adrenaline just dripping into his system the whole time he was there, even if he wasn't on a call. And then especially when he would be in flight and coming back. But then when he would come back home, it was almost as though it just kept going. It wasn't, and that is what I remember in one of your podcasts, and I so much appreciate this, is this, once we have this knowledge that we can move between, we can move the dial on the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic, that when we realize with awareness that we need to move into that parasympathetic before we're going to go talk to our husband or our wife, before we're going to go see our kids, before we need to go to sleep, do something actively, do an intervention to turn up the parasympathetic tone, that is, to rest and relax. And it must be an incredibly heavy lift to do that as an emergency service, whether you're a firefighter in the ER, this type of thing, because of the degree and frequency of stressors. But that's why you're here, to talk about these things, to offer these as tools.
Yeah, let's chase that thread a little bit. I love to talk about sleep, and my entire master's research project was around sleep.
Oh, really?
And
I'd love to
so
read it.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I learned a lot, right? And the correlation between sleep and chronic disease, especially cancer, occupational
yeah,
cancer for shift workers and things like that, it's undeniable, right?
yeah,
However, it's not a conversation that most people are willing to have, because it has to change culturally how we do some things, or how our shift works, our shift schedules go, and so reduced
yeah,
work hour weeks and things like that, which we're not going to get into on this episode by any means. But let's kind of chase that, because a lot of emergency responders, whether they're a nurse, a night shift nurse, whether they are, a firefighter working a 24-hour shift, or potentially a 48-hour shift, or maybe even longer if they're getting mandatory hired, a police officer who works shifts, and maybe their shifts rotate based on
yeah,
every 4, 6, 8 months or something like that. Sleep is always a thing. Like, hey, I'm having a heck of a time. So for us, we work 48 hours, 48.96. We work 2 days, then we get 4 days off. So for those 2 days, sometimes I've been on engine companies where we get up 5, 6 times on average every single night. And it's
wow,
really hard to fall back asleep when you come back, even if it was kind of a nothing call, because boom, lights come on, tones are going, you might be running emergent, to an emergency call. And then you're coming back, and now you're trying to de-stress. And now you got this little computer in your hand that you're like, oh, I'll just look at YouTube for a little while or whatever. And we have
right,
all these other stress inputs. So how would you coach somebody? Like, it is just a nonstop cortisol drip. But the difference, I think, with the emergency services population is, the average career of a firefighter is 25 years or so. So if you have a 25-year cortisol drip, even when you're not on a 911 call, because, right, you have the in-station dynamics, like somebody's always getting their chops busted, right?
yeah,
Or it's like, what are we going to have for dinner tonight? Or we have all this stuff that we have to do, and on and on and on. Like, there's all these stressors over 25 years amount of time. And if we don't deal with that comes from an acute day into a chronic issue. and a
Yeah.
systemic issue. So sleep seems to be the very first thing that it starts to show up. And I've seen that like the longer I've been in my career is it's harder for me to fall back asleep. Or if I wake up at a certain time of day, it's really hard for me to go back to sleep. So how do we kind of deal with that just using the breath?
Yeah. Well, let me just start by saying that what you just described is probably the most difficult situation you could possibly set up for good quality sleep. Like, I don't know of any, I thought about this, I sort of mentioned this in the book. I don't know of any other, maybe war, that would probably be the only, like, if you think about like scenarios of, so let's just recognize that it is a very difficult situation. Even if you were to apply all of the most appropriate and skillful sleep hygiene and breathing components to good quality sleep, even if you do that, what you're up against with what you just described is massive. Okay, so um, and that is a precursor to just saying that when we aren't getting good sleep, when we aren't able to fall asleep, or if we wake up in the middle of the night repeatedly or can't stay asleep, or when we wake up and we realize that we didn't have good sleep, the story, the narrative that's going on in our mind is paramount, right? Because if for example, if we wake up if we go to sleep, if we do fall asleep and after an hour we wake up and we just wake up and we're just like pissed off, we're like, oh man, I'm never going to, get to sleep tonight. And that story is another stressor. So this awareness component, is aware of what's actually moving through the mind. And as somebody who's practiced meditation for 30 years and is teaching it for almost as long, we can't control the thoughts that arise. You can't, like, but we can control our reaction. We can control our second thought. We can control our thoughts about those thoughts. And that's important to recognize, because we don't want to like beat ourselves up for the way that we think about things, but we also want to take responsibility for how we're going to proceed to think about those things, right? So so you asked the question, like, what can we do with the breath? So you've talked about on the podcast about various sleep elements of sleep hygiene. I actually include those in the book. There's a lot smarter people about sleep than me that talk about those things, yourself included. But with the breath, let's just talk about specifically about that, okay? The most important aspect of how we breathe while we sleep is how we're breathing during the day, right? We can prep it that way. So everything that we just talked about, that if we have an elevated system throughout the day where we're breathing through our mouth, where we're hyperventilating, or at least you can just say over breathing, where we're taking too many breaths, where our system is completely stressed, not from the stressors that are happening, but from our own breathing patterns. So if those can be corrected, that's going to lend itself to sleeping, to breathing better while we're sleeping. So I talk about those in the book, how we can correct what I call suboptimal or dysfunctional breathing during the day. But then during the night, it's pretty straightforward in the sense that you want to keep your mouth closed while you're sleeping. You want to breathe through your nose. The reason that we want to have nasal breathing, pretty much, we want to have nasal breathing when we're sleeping and when we're awake, unless we're doing high intensity exercise or some sort of other physical form where we actually need to move, where we need to have a higher levels of respiration. But and that's for the greater portion of the population. It's only when you exercise. For firefighters, for emergency services, it's different. But we want to breathe through our nose when we're just moving through the day, and even when we're doing slightly, when we're exercising a little bit, and that's going to put us in a better position to be able to breathe through the nose at night. Why do we always want to breathe through the nose? Well, essentially, our nose is a air conditioning system, right? When we breathe through the nose, we humidify the air. There's a cleansing aspect to it, because of when the air goes into our nose, it moves through frontal sinuses, and then the paranasal passageway. That paranasal passageway is lined with this very fine hair. It's called cilia, and it functions as to sort of clean the air that we're breathing. And within that cilia, there's a mucous membrane that's very, very beneficial. It's antimicrobial, and that is another reason why it cleans the air. The other thing that's happening within that mucus is there's nitric oxide, and you had a whole episode on nitric oxide. This is the area of our body where we produce the most nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator and a bronchial dilator. So we have a lot of benefit when we're breathing. When we breathe the air in, it takes that nitric oxide into our lungs and has all kinds of benefits for that. When we breathe through the mouth, we don't have any of this purification or humidification aspect to the air that we're breathing in. So it makes us much more vulnerable to pathogens that we're breathing in. The air just goes in the mouth, it goes over the tonsils, and goes down the esophagus and into the lungs. When we breathe through the nose, it's a smaller passageway, right? Our nose is a lot smaller. It's a little bit less than half the size of our mouth, the two holes combined. And when we have to have a bit stronger. It's more difficult to pull the air in. It's almost as though it's a syringe, and that syringe action is happening from the diaphragm. So when we breathe through the nose, it encourages the movement of the diaphragm. When we have the movement of the diaphragm, there's again a whole host of benefits that includes not only massaging all of the internal organs, this up and down action of the diaphragm, because the diaphragm connects at the sternum, connects all along the rib cage and all the way back to the vertebrae. It sort of bisects our torso. And this movement up and down is massaging our stomach and our kidneys and our liver and our heart. And so, this diaphragmatic breathing, again, we could do a whole episode on the diaphragm. But when we breathe through the nose, it's encouraged that we need to use the diaphragm to be able to do that. So how do we sleep? Like when we go to sleep and I say, you need to keep your mouth closed, there's many different reasons why people open their mouth when they're sleeping. Some of it can be anatomical in the sense that they're sleeping on their back. And so just gravity takes over where this tongue slides to the back of the throat, the jaw drops down, and they are breathing with their mouth open. But oftentimes it's because the reason that people open their mouth is they don't have the tolerance to CO2 in their system. And this is, we're going to talk a little bit about chemistry, I think here. Is this where do you want to go there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's just take a pause for a moment. And if you're not underwater or driving right now, I just want you to breathe in through your nose and then exhale out your nose. And the bottom of your exhalation, pause your breath and don't breathe back in as I'm speaking. It's been about 5 seconds. After about 10 seconds, some of you are going to start to feel an urge to breathe. And all of you are feeling something right now. You're feeling a little bit of suction happening in your belly. And if you haven't felt it, keep on holding for a little bit longer. If you need to, now just breathe in through your nose and exhale normally. Okay. That feeling that you had, I had you inhale and exhale, hold your breath. That feeling that you had to breathe, if I ask 10 people on the street, why did you feel that you needed to breathe? What was the sensation in the body that was telling you to breathe? 9 out of 10 people are going to tell you, I needed oxygen. If you had an oximeter on or pulse oximeter on your finger, you would see that your oxygen saturation levels in your blood didn't change at all. You were holding your breath for 10 to 30 seconds. It wasn't because you needed oxygen. Oxygen was being delivered into your organs, into your brain, into your cells. The reason that you needed to breathe was that your body was saying, get rid of the rising levels of CO2 that's in your blood, right? You have these sensors throughout your body that are sensing that senses that your biochemistry is this amazing system. And when you exhale, and hold, you're still alive. Your cells are having cellular respiration, and the output of those cellular respiration is H2O and CO2. That CO2 is going into your blood. And when it rises just a little bit up, a little bit higher than normal, your system immediately responds and says, get rid of that CO2. You need to exhale. So you didn't need to actually inhale in the oxygen. You needed to expel CO2, right? When in biology 101, we learned that CO2, in high school or college, that CO2 was a waste gas. Like we would breathe in oxygen and we would breathe out CO2. And then we called it a waste gas. And that it's a misnomer. It's definitely not a waste gas. We are expelling it. We are exhaling it. But the CO2 in our system is critically important for the delivery of oxygen into our brain, into our cells, and into our organs. It's something called the Bohr effect. And what happens is that the CO2, because it's acidic, when we breathe in, when we inhale, you can even just visualize this. Right now, the air around you has about 21% oxygen. You inhale, it goes into your nose, down your throat, esophagus, into your lungs, and immediately it goes in through it moves through your lungs, through the alveoli, into your bloodstream. It just happened right there. It's truly amazing. Like it's almost like a miracle to think about how the lungs work. But the oxygen that just moved into your bloodstream attaches to hemoglobin, and that hemoglobin, it carries it throughout the heart pumps it throughout the body. The stimulus for the oxygen to jump off of the hemoglobin into the cells and into the brain and your muscles is the appropriate level of carbon dioxide. And if we can learn, actually, if we can get habituated to have slightly higher levels of CO2 in our system, we can actually have a higher dosage of oxygen into our brain, right? If you have ever seen anybody hyperventilate, if any of our listeners have ever seen anybody hyperventilate, and that could just be from seeing a spider or a snake or for whatever other reason, what is happening? Somebody is like, they're breathing heavy, right? And then what is the usual first effects of hyperventilation, apart from sweating and is you start to get a little dizzy. The reason is that you're blowing off too much CO2, and immediately you're not getting the oxygen delivered to your brain, and that's why you start to feel dizzy. And what was on the farm, like what was the way that you used to get rid when somebody was hyperventilating? What would you do to have them come back into homeostasis? You give them a paper bag. And the reason is that they put the paper bag in and they're breathing back in a slightly higher concentrations of CO2 that they're breathing out, and that self-regulates their system. So this is a little bit of a wand. We just did a whole vagabond into chemistry of the blood, a very brief, but it's important because what happens is if we're breathing with our mouth all day long, or when we have slightly higher levels of movement, and we immediately open up our mouth, while it might not appear as though we're hyperventilating, where we're going to pass out, we are over-breathing. And when we overbreathe, we slightly reduce the amount of CO2 in our bloodstream, so we're not getting adequate oxygen to the brain and to the tissues. And that is a recipe for poor decision making, right? So if we're running and we're hyperventilating for minutes before we arrive at a site, we're not poised to make our brain literally is not in a good position to make good decisions because we're not getting adequate oxygen. So if we're breathing that way all the way, if we have habitual chronic mouth breathers, or if we're overbreathing during the day, our system will be stressed. Then we move into sleep. And if we continue to breathe with our mouth open, you can imagine what's happening 8 hours. If you're sleeping for a couple hours or even 8 hours and you're over breathing with the mouth open, you're not getting adequate oxygen delivery, the fuel for the brain and for your muscles and for your tissues. So of course, you're not going to feel well rested when you wake up in the morning, because you literally have starved yourself of nutrients that are needed for the functioning. So that's the first reason that I'll say. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but I'll turn it over to you for him, Kev.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And great chemistry lesson. The Bohr effect is awesome. And we have an episode out called Why Tolerance Matters, CO2 tolerance, that is. That kind of explains that exact same systems and processes. But I like that the way, and that's why I like this book so much, is the way that you are able to take some of these nerdy concepts and just smash them down into like usable tidbits of information that you
Yeah,
can use it as a reference guide and say, hey, I'm having a hard time falling back asleep. But now we just went on a journey of, okay, well, let's start with how are you breathing all day long while you're
yeah,
awake? And if you're breathing in a stress pattern while you're awake, the one time when you're supine and asleep, which should be the optimal rest and relaxation state. And if you're just breathing through your mouth, you're already creating stress in that zone where you should be 100% parasympathetic.
exactly. So what can we do like right before? So if we are the original question that came up is like, what can we do to have to set ourselves up to sleep well vis-a-vis the breath? Well, if we have, if you have the wherewithal to do this, is before you go to sleep, if you can help yourself down regulate your system before you actually go to sleep, that is a wonderful sort of habit or ritual or something just to do. And I'm not talking about going off to meditate for an hour or something. I'm just saying like right before you go to sleep, even while you're lying down or if you're seated, we've already put away our screens, by the way, like 3 hours ago. Screens and sleep are just like, they're not happening. It is, you are setting yourself up for a poor night's rest or a poor nap if you are scrolling beforehand. Just, I'm sorry. That's just there's many reasons you probably talked about it. Just use discipline and put your phone down. So, um, and I'm guilty of it as well. So I'm not like just it's tough, the algorithms that get us. So let's take part in our own rescue on this part, on this accord and put our screens down. So once we put the screens down and we are in bed or even right before bed, is take 5 or 10 minutes and turn on like consciously turn on your parasympathetic nervous system by doing some sort of down regulating breathing technique, which you presented here. Many of them are in my book, and it can be something as simple as extending your exhale for longer than your inhale. So what does that mean? So you're just lying in bed. You're lying in bed, put your hands on your belly to sort of feel the movement. That can help. And just on the inhale, just count the number of, you don't have to change how you're breathing on the inhale, but just notice breathing through your nose. If you breathe in, most people are going to breathe in for a 3 or 4 count. And then on the exhale, just breathe out a little bit longer. No force, no exertion. We're not doing some sort of crazy yogic breathing here. We're just extending our exhale and begin to do that. As that's one practice that you can do. It's super simple and super effective. And it's effective because it's physiology, right? There's no belief required on it. The second thing that you can do, which you talked about I was so happy that you talked about on a previous episode, and my brother applied and couldn't believe, because I've talked to him about mantras before, but he applied and said it like put him to sleep. So there's in the yogic tradition, in the Buddhist tradition, we have these words that we repeat mentally or even verbally, but we oftentimes repeat them mentally, and they usually have some sort of meaning behind them, some sort of esoteric meaning behind them. But we're not going to incorporate that. But there is this. It's a mantra, if you will, and you talked about it. It's this so hum, right? On the inhale, you think to yourself so it's so, and then on the exhale, you just think to yourself hum. This mantra of so hum it does a number of things. First of all, we can't think of two things at the same time, right? It's just like that. It's the way that the mind works. So if you're thinking of so on the inhale, you're not thinking of your bills. If you're thinking of so, you're not thinking of the political commercial that you saw earlier in the night. You are self-interrupting yourself. And that's very skillful. To be able to interrupt ourselves is really beneficial. And that's what mindfulness practice is all about. Like mindfulness is amazing, but mindfulness just means the word itself in Pali, it's sati. Sati just means to remember. And what are you remembering? You're just remembering to return to what you chose to return to, the breath or the mantra or whatever, the gaze of the candle, whatever. So we can, or you're returning to your studies, or mindfulness is just mindfully returning to. So applying a mantra is using using a word to return to. So we're using mindfulness, but we're not even going to call it mindfulness practice. We're not even going to call this meditation, because then that sets us up for like ideas that we have where we have to sit up straight and sit in full lotus and all that. That's not what we're doing. We just lie down there and you just think to yourself, so, and then exhale, right? If you want to hum the exhale with and then inhale through the nose, not through the mouth. And when you inhale, you think to yourself, so, and then hum. This is another type of practice called so hum practice that down regulates the system. Physiologically speaking, what we're doing is we're, again, extending the exhale, because when you say hum, you are extending your exhale for longer than you would otherwise. And the hum, the actual humming aspect of it, also is deeply relaxing because it increases the amount of nitric oxide in the paranasal passageway, and it vibrates the upper palate, which also stimulates the vagus nerve. So these are ways that we can use this apparatus of the body. We can turn different switches on it to help us relax. So you have the extended exhale practice, you have the so hum practice, and the other thing that I oftentimes recommend is just having your hands on your belly and just feeling the rise and fall of the belly. So this is this is a super, super light touch in the sense that you're just tapping into the physical sensation of the movement of the breath. You're not doing anything else. With all three of these practices, or any of the other practices, when the mind goes off and starts to think about the call that you had earlier in the night, or things about financial bills, or things about whatever the case may be, that's called distraction. And that's totally normal. So you don't have to beat yourself up for thinking about that thing again that you don't want to think about. You don't have to think about why you're thinking about it, because that's just more thinking. Just come back to the practice. Come back to the breath each time. So, and that's very similar to the alarm bell from the nurse in the emergency room, that the actual thoughts, our actual distractions, which were usually distractions, can be the spur for us to relax. So we don't have to blame the thought and get pissed off about thinking about it again. We can just say, hey, yeah, crazy bills I have, exhale. Just that. So the stimulus it's a kind of remembrance device, a remembering device for us to relax. So that's what we can do right beforehand, okay? So do something beforehand. You have some things on the podcast. I have the things I just recommended here. Or you do right before you sleep. And if you haven't fallen asleep already, right, you need to sleep with your mouth closed while you sleep. Now, some of you will say, I have various anatomical reasons why I can't. I have a deviated septum, or I have a cold, or all of these things. So if you can, if it's possible to sleep with your mouth closed, and you can also, if you do have a deviated septum, you can learn to do this. You can relearn to breathe through your nose. And have you talked about mouth taping on the pod?
We do have a mouth tape episode, yes, but yeah, cover it for sure in case somebody doesn't know what you're talking about.
I can't believe how this has been the thing that I think I've received the most feedback on, where people are just like, oh, like, this is the best thing you've ever told me, the best thing I've ever read. It's because, and the reason is because they get a good night's sleep and they wake up and they're like, oh my God, like, what the hell was that? it wasn't a drug or like wasn't. Okay, so I've talked about keeping the mouth closed and the benefits of doing that. But some of us, for various reasons, our mouth comes open. So you can tape your mouth closed at night safely. And this isn't using electrician tape or duct tape or something, right? And what we're doing here is the idea is that it isn't as though we're sealing our mouth closed, is that we're just training our lips and our jaw to be in this anatomically optimal place to sleep. And so we get a little bit of medical tape, just this very lightweight medical tape. You can get it at any pharmacy, and you can just put it over like a little bit bigger than a postage stamp over the middle portion of your mouth. Some people use this sort of X or different ways, but the simplest way is you just put it over your lips. You have your teeth not you have your mouth closed, but your teeth not clenched. Your tongue is on the roof of the mouth, and you just breathe in that way. Now, the first time or two when you try to do this, you very well might take it off in the middle of the night. You can always just open your mouth because it's not strong enough to keep your mouth closed. Because some people have, they're nervous about this. It makes them feel nervous to put tape on their mouth. So I recommend that if you have that sort of nervousness, if you have that nervousness about taping your mouth closed, is do it during the day when you're scrolling, and maybe you might even notice that you're holding your breath when you're scrolling. Side note, next time you're scrolling, be sure that you're breathing through your nose. But when you're checking your email or when you're just reading or even watching television or something like this, just tape your mouth closed and get a feel for what it's like. And then you can slowly, I have a sort of a week protocol on how to get into mouth taping. But the benefits of being able to have your mouth closed throughout the night are such that it can move you through these various cycles of sleep, right? The initial sort of falling asleep, moving into REM sleep, moving into deep sleep. There's these cycles of sleep that we actually need to go through. And we need to go through them repeatedly 3 or 4 or 5 times throughout the night. If we are having issues like snoring or obstructive sleep apnea, or various other breathing related challenges while we're sleeping that are waking us up, that aren't allowing us to have a full cycle of to go through a full cycle of sleep. Oftentimes we can't even get into that deep sleep where all of the memory consolidation and where this sort of if in my world where we would call healing, where we have this deep restorative healing that's happening, we're not even getting into those into that part of the cycle of sleep. And keeping the mouth closed can help us do that.
Yeah, and we'll link to some products in the show notes. I've been taping my mouth for at least 4 years, and I'll go
Yeah.
through waves because I'm trying to train my body where I don't need it. But I know when my wife says, "Dude, you were snoring like crazy," that all right, it's time to
Yeah.
tape my mouth again, and that's really kind of solved that issue. It's also solved for people that I've been able to coach in that exact thing. It solves them having to get up to pee multiple times in the night because of vasopressin and all
Yeah.
this other nerd stuff that we could chase those rabbits if we'd like.
Yeah.
But I just use a very simple 3M microfiber tape and
Yeah.
take a lot of the sticky off on the back of my hand. And when I put it on my mouth, just like I'm talking right now, I can still breathe through the sides of my mouth if I had
Yeah.
to, and I can actually still have a conversation for the most part if I had to do that as well, right? If a kid comes in the middle of the night and they're like, "I had a nightmare," I don't have to take the tape off. I can have a conversation with them,
Yeah.
whether it's, "Okay, I'm trying to survive, so climb in bed here," or "beat it," one or the other, right?
Yeah.
So that's a way that I've been able to do that. And the stigma around mouth tape is now way less because there's great resources out there talking about it. The original one probably was the Jaws book, and so
Yeah.
which was written by an orthodontist and a professional writer. And so there's a lot of really cool science around this as well. And I really encourage all of you listeners out there, especially if you're in emergency services, have a sleep study done. Like, talk to your primary care. Hey, how can we work through getting even a basic sleep study done, and take a look and figure out what works for you. And then what are your actual challenges that you have to deal with? And so like for me, I have a 70% on my right side occlusion from a deviated nasal septum, which I had
Hmm.
no idea until I started dealing with a bunch of vertigo stuff. And an ENT was like,
Wow.
hey, dude, did you know this? No, but then it connected a lot of dots while I was breathing with my mouth open all the time. So it's taken a
Yeah.
long time for me to train myself to breathe through the nose, including during high levels of physical fitness. And so it is possible. Just don't latch onto an excuse. Um,
Yeah.
you will suffer sometimes as you're trying to learn through some of these things if you have an anatomical thing that you have to work around, but just figure out what works for you. And I think breath is the all-encompassing truth teller, as far as like, are you stressed out? Are you relaxed? Are you way too relaxed? Right? Are we apathetic? Are we depressed? And then
Yeah.
you can also use the breath then to get the thing kickstarted. And you made a great point where we don't talk very much at all about how do I create sympathetic nervous system activation on this podcast through using my breath, because that's for the most part not what we need in our business. We
Yeah.
need
Yeah.
to chill out a little bit.
For office workers at 3 o'clock, they all need it. All
Mhm.
the corporations that come to me and I talk to them, they love this because it, increases their productivity and whatnot, but it's because they have this lull. After lunch, they're digesting and they just have this lull. And so there is this activation that can happen. But I think it's a really good point that you said about partners. If your wife or husband is saying, you're snoring all the time, or if they're snoring all the time, if you can get them to mouth tape, um, it's safe. And you gave the other hints on other things to do. And the last thing I would just say is that when you have it on your lips, is take it off with your tongue. Just stick it out, push it off with your tongue, that moisture, so you don't have any irritation on your lips. Truly amazing. I had to get used to it. I have a mouth guard. And so it was that mouth, once I got the mouth guard, because there's something else in the mouth, it was having, my mouth was coming open. And so, yeah, I think it's been about the same amount of time that I've been mouth taping. And I just do it all the time now. Just there's so many benefits, as you said, not needing to pee, um, increasing libido. It's amazing. So I talk about a fair bit about mouth taping in Breathe How You Want to Feel, but as you said, there's a lot of other resources, including at Oxygen Advantage and elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What a great resource too, with the work that Patrick McCown has done. Amazing
Yeah.
stuff. And you've referenced some of those like breathe light to breathe right stuff along the
Yeah.
ways, here. And that's where this resource, Breathe How You Want to Feel, this book right here, um, has encompassed a lot of these resources from all these different sources, including the Buddhist and yogic traditions. And it's put it into a very, very easy to digest and usable reference guide. It's
Yeah.
just very
Thank
well
you.
done. Very well
Yeah.
done, for
I mean,
sure.
with the breath, I mean, you just said it, like the yogis don't have a monopoly on the breath. The Buddhists don't have a monopoly on the breath. Oxygen Advantage doesn't have a monopoly on the breath. Like, we all can partner with our breath. And it's this amazing uh, tool that we can use to to optimize living, right? And that's literally why I gave the title Breathe How You Want to Feel. If you want to feel like shit and like have no energy and like all the rest, that you can breathe a particular way, and I'll guarantee that it will be that way. But if not, but if you want to make if you want to make changes, have breath as one of the fundamental pillars. There's other things that you need to do. There's movement, there's mindset, but the breath is fundamental. It is one of the pillars.
Yeah, I think you make a great point too. That, like, if you want to feel like shit, you breathe like shit. And for some of us, at times, we feel like shit because we're breathing like shit. And it might be tied to an environment that we go to, right? So let's say you go to work and you're not super jazzed about it, or maybe you're experiencing burnout or things like that. Really, really pay attention to how you're breathing, because you're still choosing to go there. Nobody is essentially making you. Yes, the mortgage company might be kind of making you,
Mhm.
right? But you essentially always choose those actions unless you're in a captive environment. So if you're going to work or you get in the squad car or you're riding the ambulance and you feel like crap every single time that you go to work, I would really encourage you to instantly just start to figure out, how am I breathing? And I would venture to guess that you're probably hyperventilating just because of that place, that environment, that stressor that's there. And pay attention to that. And then I would heavily encourage you to use things like peer support teams, clinicians. Like, let's start to unpack this, because you have a correlated physiological response, biological response, that I go and I sit in the ambulance and I instantly start hyperventilating. Let's unpack that. You got some stuff that you got to get rid of, and
Yeah.
use the professionals to help you with that. But you
Yeah.
can also use a very free resource that nobody knows that you're doing it, by extending your exhale 2 to 1, which creates parasympathetic tone. It gets the phrenic nerve going, the vagus nerve going, and calms you down. Nobody knows that you have just extended your exhale versus breathing just how
Yeah.
you normally breathe,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
use those things to your advantage.
I love how you just put that, because, when we're in an acute situation that we're sort of not keen on, whether that just be because a thought just came up, or something that, a little bit more where you just said, just sort of, you're in the squad car or whatever situation, oftentimes our mind right then wants to go to the why. Like, why? And that is just increases the thought loops. So in those moments, it's more of the, what can I do right now? And that's that awareness. That's where the awareness and the intervention, that's the line between the awareness and intervention, is what can I do? What tools do I have? And you just offered one, you extend the exhale. There's a lot of other things that we can do, but that is it's like the most fundamental one, is just extending your exhale longer than inhale. That's the what. And that puts you in a position to then, when you want to do the inquiry on, like, why is this situation happening? And you just gave the resource, with the peer resources and other sort of professional tools that we can have. But if we begin with the what can I do right now? That puts us in a position to answer, or to have, like, the wherewithal to inquire about the why.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all interconnected, and it
So
doesn't
much.
have to be, this thing. You certainly don't have to post about it on social media. Nobody needs to know that you're doing it. It's a
Yeah.
free resource that you already have within your body, that, the toughest dudes on the planet use it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the
It's a
samurais used it.
ninja. Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah. You see
absolutely.
all
And so, yeah, every war fighting culture in the history of time has had some sort of breath practice that they've used to prepare for battle, or while they're going into battle, or while they're in battle. If you do any research, you'll find that
Yeah.
all over the world. So there's got to be something to that. And then they also used it to help recover and heal and down regulate and all of those sorts of things when they were done doing whatever they were out there doing. And
Yeah.
so let's tap into these resources for sure. Well, I mean, we've spent quite a bit of time. I really appreciate how generous you are with your time here. I want to thank you again for this amazing reference, the Breathe How You Want to Feel book, and that's going to be referenced in the show notes as well. I would love to have you come back here, because we hit one of the questions that I had written down for you. So I would
Hmm.
love to bring you back at some point on the Firefighter Craftsmanship Podcast, and we can talk about, how do we optimize our breathing, maybe when we're in a performance zone or something like that. That's an easily another hour-long conversation.
Yeah.
That would be amazing if you're willing to share some more resources with us in the future.
Would love
For
to do that.
now,
I
yeah,
would
that'd
love
be
to do that.
amazing.
And anything, like, you're benefiting, so many folks with in the emergency services. So I'm like honored to have their ear for a moment. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yes, it's been great. I've definitely learned some stuff here as well. How can people find you if you want them to?
Yeah, you can go to my website at matteopistono.com, or on Instagram, same thing, Matteo Pistono. And yeah, if you have any questions, direct questions, just DM me. Not like I have a bunch of staff or anything, and I'm happy to talk about the breath. I'm always happy to talk about the breath and meditation, and hear about your experiences. So yeah, go ahead and reach out.
Amazing. Fantastic. And I can't let this one slide, being from Fort Collins, Colorado, and you go onto UW of Go Rams.
Yeah,
Oh,
for sure. Our homecoming game often was against.
the border war there. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
well, thank you. Thank you again. We really appreciate your generosity and what you're willing to share with us here. And thank you for the amazing amount of work, this body of work that you have in this book right here. It is worth the $17 or whatever it's going to cost you to get this thing, and just use this as a fantastic reference guide as well. And thank you for sharing and rating and reviewing this show. We're just trying to grind it out and grow this thing from the grassroots.
yeah.
Please continue to give us positive feedback, all of you listeners out there, and stay smart.